full behind-the-scenes origins of the clone troopers that fought during the Galactic Clone Wars is unknown, even for a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans. As for a lot of individuals, the story of the clone troopers begins when they're first introduced in Attack of the Clones, and the story of the clones begin during the Clone Wars era, when they're deployed into battle officially for the first time during the Battle of Geonosis, something that we'll lightly cover at the end of this video. But what are the true backstories and origins of the clone troopers? And what all went into the master plan of Darth Sidious to have the clone troopers eventually turn on the Jedi, executing them and allowing him to ascend to the rank of Emperor of the new found Galactic Empire. In this video, we will break down everything that occurred with the clone troopers before the Battle of Geonosis and right into the Battle of Geonosis, covering where the clone troopers came from, their early development, and the grand plan of Darth Sidious concerning the troopers. It was years before the invasion of Naboo that Jedi Master Sifo Dyas came to believe that the galaxy would soon become engulfed by war. He therefore advocated for the creation of an army to ensure the defense of the Galactic Republic and its people, but his views were ultimately rejected by his peers and the Jedi Council, and he was cast out of the Jedi High Council personally, being deemed extremist, with many of the Jedi fearing that Sifo Dyas sought out a war that would never come. Undeterred by the lack of support from the other Jedi, Sifo Dyas secretly contacted the Kaminoans, a species of experts in cloning, native to the planet of Kamino, and commissioned them to create an army of clone soldiers for the Republic, without authorization of either the High Council or the Senate, secretly using Jedi credits that were set aside for the use of the Jedi Order. All of this, though, had all been the grand plan of a Sith Lord in hiding, Darth Sidious, who had planted the seeds within the mind of Sifo Dyas' mind that a war was in fact on the horizon. But he needed a Jedi to initiate the clones, as he could not do it directly, as the Jedi would then be more easily able to trace back the origins of the clone troopers directly to him, and his identity as a corrupt senator at the least would be exposed, and at the worst, the ancient enemy of the Jedi, the Sith. Shortly afterwards, Sifo Dyas was killed by the Pike Syndicate at the behest of the Sith Lord, resulting in the Sith's takeover of the Clone Trooper project. Darth Tyrannus, better known as Dooku, the apprentice of the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, recruited the bounty hunter Jango Fett to become the genetic template of the clone army, deeming Jango Fett a worthy individual to eventually kill Jedi, seeing his skills in combat. Various modifications, however, were made to the Fett genome so that the clones would grow faster and be more susceptible to following orders. The hyper-aggressiveness and volatile tendencies were also tailored from Jango Fett, making the clone troopers cooler heads than their original genetic template. The Kaminoans also resorted to the growth acceleration in order to create mature clones in half the time it took a human to reach full maturity. Fett's genetic structure was further modified to make the clones less independent and more docile than their template. However, the clones were also designed to be capable of creative thinking, a trait that made them far superior to battle droids in the heat of combat, and something that gave them an edge, despite being outnumbered 1,000 to 1 at the beginning of the Clone War. In addition to Fett's financial compensation, the bounty hunter requested an unaltered clone for himself. As a result, the clone known as Boba Fett was created without the genetic modifications that caused the other clones to grow faster and obey orders without question, literally making him an exact copy of Jango Fett, and a literal son to the bounty hunter. Although the Kaminoans believed that the army was meant to serve the Republic, the Sith intended to use the clone troopers as their secret weapon against the Jedi Order. But first, they had to gain their trust. The true purpose of the clone army was to utterly exterminate the Jedi when they were ordered to turn. And to that end, an organic inhibitor chip was implanted into the brain of every clone trooper at the third stage of their development. In at least one case though, this chip ultimately failed, in the case of clone trooper Tup, which caused him to turn on the Jedi before Order 66 was given. Officially, the chips were supposed to make the clones less aggressive and independent than Jango Fett, a lie to the Jedi. The significance of the inhibitor chip was supported by the assertion that a clone would become mentally unstable and dangerous to everyone around him if his chip was ever damaged or surgically removed. The chips were in fact, though, created to compel the clone troopers to execute Order 66, a secret protocol, and authorize the destruction of the Jedi Jedi Order. Following this, each and every clone trooper was given an identifying code inserted into his left wrist. During the war, the codes were linked to the file of every individual clone trooper in the Republic's military database. The files, which could be accessed by an astromech droid via the scanning of the clone's identity code, contained the clone's designation, rank, and overall service record, as well as any specialized training and the units that he was affiliated with. Within a decade after Sifo-Dyas commissioned the creation of the clone army, the first 200,000 units were ready, with a million more underway. It was around this same time the Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered the clone project on Kamino and duly informed the Jedi Council. By then, the galaxy was on the verge of civil war between the Republic and the Separatist movement. They ultimately formed into the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Since the Jedi lacked the sufficient manpower to guard the entire Republic, the Senate resolved to grant emergency powers to the executive branch. As a result of this, the clone troopers were formally organized into the Grand Army of the Republic by Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, the elected leader of the Senate and public persona of Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith. Clone troopers were deployed into battle for the first time on the planet of Geonosis, where 12 Acclamator-class droid assault ships supplied by Kamino were loaded with 2 battle armies, or around 200,000 troops. Under the leadership of the Jedi, the Grand Army of the Republic forced the Separatist droid army into a full retreat, and subsequently won the first battle of the Clone Wars and a victory on Geonosis. As for Legends continuity, the story of the clone troopers is largely the same until we get to Jango Fett, and the story of how Jango Fett was actually selected by Darth Tyrannus to be the clone template of the Grand Army of the Republic that would one day kill the Jedi. Before the cloners on Kamino were able to begin their task, they required an individual subject to serve as the army's genetic template. Tyrannus, who had been ordered by Sidious to both search for an ideal candidate amongst the galaxy's deadliest mercenaries and eliminate a deranged former Jedi named Kamori Vosa, who was in fact his own former apprentice. Dooku devised a plan to accomplish the two objectives at the exact same time. Thus, he placed a 5 million credit reward on the capture of Vosa, who had become a leader of the Bondo Gora. Whether she was dead or alive after her capture did not matter, as the prize money was the same either way. Among the mercenaries who received a special invitation from Darth Tyrannus was Jango Fett, a former Mandalorian who sought to make a living as a bounty hunter. When Fett successfully tracked down and defeated Kamori Vosa in combat, Tyrannus personally congratulated the bounty hunter, and in addition to the reward money, offered him something different, and a more substantial amount of credits if Fett agreed to be cloned on Kamino. The purpose, as Tyrannus revealed, was the creation of the army of clones modified to grow at twice the rate of human beings, and programmed for absolute loyalty. Their training, supervised by Jango Fett, would turn them into perfect soldiers. After a moment of contemplation, Fett agreed to Tyrannus' offer, but on one condition, that the first clone would be given to him without any modifications. Before the gestation process began, the Kaminoans tampered with Fett's DNA to ensure that the clones were primarily dominated by behavioral genes that emphasize certain qualities, such as loyalty, aggression, independence, and discipline, in order to guarantee that the army would be more docile and less independent than their normal template, as was the same case in Star Wars canon that we explored earlier. Additionally, the Kaminoans increased their clones' lung capacity and decreased their reaction times, as well as improved their stamina. In addition to this, the Kaminoans also brought in a consultant in the form of an aged Mandalorian warrior named Kal Skarata, who was additionally brought in to assist in the training of a special clone trooper unit. Kal concurred with the Kaminoans' rationale behind modified troopers, and unaltered Jango Fett was not the ideal infantry soldier, agreeing with all of the modifications that the Kaminoans placed on the troopers. The Kaminoans also considered but rejected making the clone troopers sterile, per their standard procedure for clone army projects. If they made the clones sterile, in other cases they had experienced higher rates of mental instability, poor unit cohesion, and an inability to adapt and think creatively, especially with human clone troopers. In addition to all of these drawbacks, they also experienced a decreased aggressiveness in battlefield simulations. When the Kaminoans first began the cloning procedure, they had produced 12 prototypes. Due to the extreme modifications to their physiology, only half of the test subjects survived the gestation process. However, the enhancements that were made to Fett's genome left the survivors handicapped with erratic behavior and inclination towards disobedience. Essentially, the first batch of clone troopers were an utter failure. Disappointed with the unsatisfactory results on their wayward creations, the Kaminoans deemed the 6 prototypes complete failures and intended to terminate them. Cal, along with Jango Fett, had an intervention though, which stopped the clone troopers from immediately being liquidated. Because of this, instead of killing them, Cal was charged with training these prototypes as an intelligence unit. Following this though, in Legends continuity, the clone troopers experienced some success. But that is basically the full origins of the clone troopers in both Star Wars canon as well as in Star Wars Legends. If you guys enjoyed this longer form video, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like. And if we can get this video to 4,000 likes in the first 24 hours, I will release a video explaining fully in depth what it was like for clone troopers to train to be in the Galactic Army, and what training for a clone trooper was actually like under Jango Fett. As always though, my friends, thank you so much for watching. May the Force be with you, and have a great day.